I want to go, though, to Rick Rennell, because there's some major shifting, of course, international news. And the stories are all over the place, Rick. First off, we're seeing, Israel say, listen, we started I think the best description from any Israeli analyst was, we started the dominoes. And then when we start the dominoes in Israel, and we've not yet done that before until we started taking out top Hezbollah and Hamas leadership. Once we started the dominoes, that Netanyahu told Assad, they're coming for you next. And they're not going to, the other guys can't protect you. Hezbollah's been decimated and Russia's stuck in Ukraine.
Well, one thing we should make perfectly clear is that we're in this situation because of the Biden administration, how weak their policies have been and how much they've funded Iran and all of Iran's proxies. But I think that regular folks within the Middle East have had enough, and they're really fighting back. And certainly Israel has given so many people hope, including in Lebanon, when they've taken on the fight of Hezbollah. This is a fight that they've done without the Biden administration's help. And I would also say, in spite of the Biden administration, they've really tried to hold a lot of the progress back. A lot of this should have been cleaned up immediately. We shouldn't have had October 7th, but if it did happen, you should allow the Israelis to go in and defend their country and clean up the situation. We shouldn't be in this more than a year later. But it's because the Biden administration has really held the players in the region, with one hand tied behind their back for a variety of countries. I do think that what's happening in Syria now, President Trump is exactly right. We need to let it play out a little bit. We don't need to get involved. We do have troops there, and I think the Biden team needs to hear President Trump loud and clearly that we don't need to be using our troops. But that doesn't mean that we can't be diplomatic leaders and have the State Department be able to do its job in our embassies and around the world. And we should play a leadership role without playing a military role.
And I wanted to ask you about the troops, Rick, because I know our listeners, I remember when Tulsi Gabbard would talk to us about the troops that are still out in Syria, still basically as close to the front lines as you can be when you're battling these multifaceted Islamist groups, and you've got Assad's groups, and you've got the Hezbollah back then, and also these more radical groups, and then you're kind of stuck in the middle as the Americans of who to trust and who to fight with. We see the Kurds they're already going after, but how much in danger are those 900 troops right now? Because I saw that Russia made a deal with these insurgents that Russian assets, Russian airports and bases are not going to be attacked, and embassies and their staff, but can the U.S. make a deal it doesn't, we don't quite have the same kind of access points to these radical groups.
Look, we have troops there because we wanted to make sure that Christians were protected and that ISIS didn't take hold. We can debate whether or not that's too many troops, whether we could have done it from another place. But the idea at the time was to keep a small number of troops there so that ISIS wouldn't be able to come back in a strong way. Remember, Donald Trump defeated ISIS. So this is one of those situations where we want to make sure that ISIS doesn't come back in. The brutal treatment of Christians is just one of the reasons why we want to make sure that ISIS doesn't come back. But I actually believe that we have a NATO ally in Turkey. And I know that Turkey has not been perfect, and we've ignored Turkey for too long. But my idea is that if you are going to be in a NATO membership agreement with Turkey, which we have been since 1952, then you can't treat them as a non-NATO member. We share intelligence with Turkey. We need to get them more on our side. And the Turks care very deeply about what's happening in this region. Again, they are a NATO ally. And I would force the critics of Turkey to come clean and either say that they want Turkey out of NATO, or we should deal with the reality that Turkey is in NATO and they need to be a closer ally. We haven't done a very good job of really pressuring Turkey to be a better ally, be better with Israel, and to help us in certain ways. Remember, Turkey has a very interesting relationship with Russia. Sometimes they're close to Russia, and sometimes they are the blunt force to stop Putin. Erdogan is somebody who I think has some power there. And President Trump recognizes that we have to deal with the leader of Turkey as a NATO ally, and we need to get them more on our side. I think they can do a lot in Syria. Syria right now is a mess, but remember that all of the rebel groups that have been going up against Assad and against Iran and against Russia for a long time, they were united just because they were the opposition. They're not united because they believed the same way. So now that Assad is gone and the Syrian government has fallen, now we need to be very cautious because we don't know within that rebel group, that within that opposition group, we really don't know who's going to rise up. There's some bad actors in there, and there are some decent actors in that group. We need to give it a little more time, and President Trump is right to just wait and see what happens.
Yeah, we know some of the bad actors coming from the al-Nusra Front, which was kind of a break off of like al-Qaeda to be kind of a militant group instead of just a terror group that hides in the shadows, but actually goes into cities. But you mentioned that there are some other groups involved here. Are there names of those groups that that listeners and our viewers can start trying to get updated about so they understand? I mean, they love understanding these issues, Rick, and explaining it to their friends and family. So if there's those additional actors, if you're able to name them, it would be, I think, helpful for the audience.
Look, I want to slow down and make sure that we get these facts right. There are many opposition groups that have come together, and we still don't know exactly the numbers. We don't know who is in control. We see a lot of differing information from the different groups on social media. Some who have risen up to say that they're in leadership positions are former al-Qaeda members. You've got other organizations that I think are suspect and some that are quite good. Certainly we know the Kurds are there. And yet we have to be honest with the Kurds, thank them for all of the help that they've given us, but also be realistic about the chances of the Kurds coming into a leadership role, which I don't think is going to happen. So I think we should just slow down and wait to see who rises up and who these different groups actually are. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and we're not exactly sure who's part of the rebel groups. And so I'd like to make sure that we give it a little time. I think President Trump's warning of let it play out a little bit more is exactly right. And let me finish with this, Jordan, is, the big mystery in the Middle East has always been, are these dictatorships, these governments that are human rights abusers, is it going to get worse when they fall, and should we take a slower approach? This is one of the strengths of Donald Trump, is to deal with the reality on the ground rather than to send in the Americans and try to completely take over the situation or handpick who should be in charge. And then that completely backfires on us. Donald Trump is a realist. He wants to deal with how the situation unfolds. That's why I talk about Turkey. Turkey is going to play a major role. Syria is a border country with Turkey. They care very deeply about the humanitarian situation. As a NATO ally, I think we should defer to Turkey and hear them out first before we begin to pick any players as to who's going to rise up and be in charge.
Rick, we are in the midst, of course, of our most important fundraising time of the year, because it's how we plan our budget going into January. And on these issues, we're very active through our international organizations that we're affiliated with at the United Nations all over the world, ICC, and of course, because of the work in Israel and beyond that we do in the Middle East and the Gulf states. So it's a great time, and I know that you've been very open to tell people about why it's important to support the ACLJ, and this time they can double the impact of their donation.
Well, look, I think the Trump administration is going to need help from organizations like ACLJ. I know everyone seems to be tapped out, but I would dig deep to support an organization like the ACLJ, which takes action, doesn't just talk about issues.
Thank you, Rick. And you know what? The great thing is, even if you are a bit tapped out, this allows you to double your donation. So a $5 donation becomes 10, 20 becomes 40. Donate today, aclj.org.